Hey there, MVP Days fans, back for another session with you here. This time we're going to be talking about something that is so important for everyone to live in our post-pandemic, actually current pandemic era. And with me today, I have an amazing presenter.
Hi guys, it's Cristal Kawula.
And my name is Dave Kawula. We're both Microsoft MVPs, and we have a third presenter
Who's not presenting?
because he's under the sea.
Under the sea, playing with the sharks.
That's right. So Mr. John O'Neill Sr., amazing speaker, couldn't be with us here today during the recording of this session. And he's actually taking some much needed me time playing with sharks. So
me time.
he was instrumental in the content and helping build this. So thank you very much, John. So more than just a nice little notice for you for helping us do that. He's a big part of us being able to do a lot of these shows with MVP Days. Now, we've had the fortune of working on some very cool projects here in 2021. We've been working a lot with what's called a modern desktop, Cristal, and a modern desktop is basically a desktop that is a cloud-connected desktop. The project that I've been working on has actually been a what we'll call a research project to completely remove Active Directory and see how far we can get with just an Azure Active Directory connection.
That feels so counterintuitive. After all our years of getting Active Directory in there.
I know, but we want something that's cloud ready, cloud everything, right? So we've been playing around with this a lot, but one of the things that is important is that most of our security and lockdown policies that we had in the past came via our group policy engine. So we would get templates that would be provided to us by our security teams or our security professionals. We would take those group policies, we would load them into group policy objects, and we would distribute them out to the enterprise. And that would be what we would typically use to lock everything down. Now, in a new modern world, how are we going to do this? There is no group policy engine because there is no Active Directory domain controller to connect to. So with that, we're going to take a look at something called Security Baselines with Endpoint Manager, and I will call it Intune throughout this session, but that's okay. And so where we're going to start off, though, is we're going to start off with something a little scary, Cristal.
Tell me a story, Dave. Tell me a story.
I do love to tell stories, Cristal, and
scary story.
I've actually been informed recently in some of my presentations that my presentations are a little bit scary. So if you are feeling the slightest bit fearful right now, well, you should be.
Absolutely.
Because this is important information for us to take and go through with you. So let me see if I can work the amazing slide clicker.
You're good. You're a good clicker.
And our story starts off on a pristine lake.
No, it doesn't.
It's a glassy lake, and it's one Friday morning, sitting out by the cabin, and you're out there looking at the lake. You got a little bit of frost.
Finally got a day off.
Frost in the air. We finally got a day off. It's probably our first day off in over a year, and we get the phone call coming in. And the phone call comes from an unusual source. It comes from somebody that we hadn't heard from in a little while. And this is basically the way that the conversation went.
Help.
Yes, it was help. And so what we were looking at was the conversation started off with, "Hey, Dave, they got us." I said, "They got us? Who is they?" "We're not really sure, but someone's inside the network right now." And the first question I ask is, "How bad is it?" And they said, "Well, they're on the domain controller." Did they get domain admins?
Why, yes. Yes, they did.
Yes, they did. And how bad does it look right now? Well, their profiles were still logged in, and what we're seeing on the firewalls right now is about 2 terabytes of data leaving to a foreign country right now. And my friends, immediately when they told me this, I knew it right away. This was a ransomwareless attack. And you're thinking,
no, what do you mean ransomwareless?
So most of us have had the fear driven into us about ransomware. Somebody's going to encrypt your files. The only way to get your files back is if you pay them the money, you restore your files, or you get the encryption key from one of the decrypting websites. There are websites now where the actual threat actors are out there. They've said, we've made enough money, so we'll just give you our key now. So if you happen to get hit, maybe you're lucky enough, maybe not. But the new way of doing this is the new,
it's basically just a ransom attack.
And what we'll call the new currency in the modern world here, Cristal, is data. Your data is the new currency. We'll call it the IT cryptocurrency, because I tell you, that stuff is worth a lot of money. And so in this attack, this type of attack, and we heard this earlier in Jeremy's keynote presentation, because he had actually the exact similar situation as to what we had here. And it's funny, it looked almost like the same note that they left as well. And in this case, the bad guys feel that they don't even need to go through the extra effort of ransoming your files because they have your data. And should we see what
So they didn't encrypt it.
They didn't encrypt it, but they left all their sessions logged in.
Yeah, they didn't lock them out of it.
Mm-hmm.
What they did was they took a copy of everything.
Yes, and this is what the note looks like. If you are reading this, that means that your network has been compromised and your sensitive private information is stolen. We breached your security and downloaded, look, even 2 terabytes of data. They're nice enough to tell us that. And if you don't pay, this is what's going to happen. We're going to release this publicly, and it's going to be very bad exposure for your team. And oh, by the way, here's screenshots from your accounting departments and all of this confidential information that we have now scraped. And in going through this process, they were actually nice enough to leave behind, Cristal, all of their tools behind as well. So the rest of the screenshots in there are some of the tools. And I'll tell you right now, one of the things that they were going after, everybody likes to take and have a password vault, a key pass vault. And so they were going and hunting the network for all of the key pass files in their searches. And they were nice enough to let us know that. So if they grab those key pass files, then they're going to try to crack those. And so in situations like this, what can we do to secure and lock this down? Now, funny enough, Cristal, this environment was secured. They did have good group policies in place. They did have good benchmarks. They did have good templates. And this is why I wanted to add this into our securing a modern desktop, because having a security baseline may not be enough.
So how did they get in, Dave?
How they got in. What a great question, Cristal. What a great question. Poor administrative practices. When we take and when we have a situation where IT pros will and I'll use the word, maybe try to take a bit of a shortcut. There is one group by default that has full access in Active Directory to any workstation account that is joined. And that group by default is the domain administrators group. The domain administrators is a local administrators on everyone's workstation. So when we create a service account for some type of IT deployment tool to deploy software, patching, monitoring, alerting, whatever for the desktops, and we're using secured credentials like that, especially highly elevated secured credentials, and that machine might be living somewhere at somebody's house, because maybe that's where we're doing some of the deployments from across a VPN connection. Guess what happens when that machine at that remote endpoint, that work from anywhere device, gets compromised?
The whole network gets compromised.
Yes, because now Mr. Bad Guys have domain admin access from an endpoint workstation, and this is really not good. So as Jeremy was talking about in his session, we can do things to prevent this, like implementing LAPS, the local admin password solution from Microsoft. We can have better administrative practices, which we'll talk about a little bit later with the privilege of the least privileged principles that are out there, and zero trust. Okay, and so what I want everybody to understand is, regardless of how good we are as a security team, poor administrative practices will always take and trump those. Okay, they will always take, and if I give out the keys to the kingdom, somebody's going to come knocking, and they're going to have, as Jeremy said, the skeleton key to get into every single door.
You can put 42 padlocks on your door, but if you hang the key outside, it's not going to help you.
That's right. That's right. So in my world that I live in today, in 2021, I really honestly believe that there's something that all IT pros must pick up, and that is being a security practitioner. You don't have to necessarily be an expert, but everyone on our team needs to be a security practitioner. We all need to be aware. And we all need the right tools in our tool belt to do the job, because it's an evolving threat landscape. We don't really know what's out there. And with that, what type of tools can we use? Well, I'm a big fan of Microsoft Defender endpoint protection. And so with Defender ATP, Advanced Threat Protection, this is a view of a Windows 10 workstation that I loaded into my lab. And I basically just did a next finish install from the ISO. I wanted to see what it looked like. And right out of the box, with just Microsoft Office 365 installed and no other applications, we saw one high vulnerability assessment along with 66 active security recommendations. And so it's interesting because I always like to see the before and the after picture when we're doing things. It's not just being able to prove our work, it's also understanding that these tools will help us improve our security posture. So
you loaded this, and then we were secure.
We loaded ATP, and it told us that we had all of these holes, and it gave us recommendations to going through and fixing them. So what I did is I went into Endpoint Manager, also known as Intune, and they have a section in there under Endpoint Security called Security Baselines. I loaded the security baseline, and I basically just did a next finish out of the security baseline, and I loaded it up on this exact same workstation. And this is what it looked like for us after we took and we loaded the security baseline. There was no more vulnerabilities, and now we were down to 20 active security recommendations.
So now we're secure.
Well, we're in better shape. Doing something is better than doing nothing, okay? And so what I want everyone to understand as we go through this, it is an ongoing process. Cristal, is security a set it and forget it?
If you forget it, someone's going to get it.
Well, absolutely. It is a full-time job. Honestly, this is a full-time job for our teams to be looking after this, because the bad guys don't sleep. And because the bad guys don't sleep, that means that they're always looking for the next hole and the next vulnerability that's coming through. I follow a lot of the threat sites that are out there to see what's coming down the pipe, and it's on a daily basis. There's something new that's coming out. So it's nearly impossible for us as individuals to stay on top of this. So we need tools like Defender ATP to help us with this.
Just like protecting our networks is our full-time job, there are people out there who getting into your network is their full-time job.
And it's a business for them.
It is, 100%.
Let's understand that. This is not just some geeky kid sitting in the basement that's doing this for fun, just to prove that they can do this. This is highly organized organizations that are out there that do this as a for-profit business, 100% for-profit.
And it's big business.
And it is big business, and there's big dollars when you get a breach. So when we take a look at what some of those 20 holes that were left inside of there were from Defender Security Center, I want to just point out that getting to a utopia where that number reads zero potential recommendations, you've closed every hole, that's not reality for any organization. There's certain settings inside of here that we'll tweak and we'll tune. They may still show up on a report. We just have to be able to justify why we didn't configure that, because maybe there was some type of a critical line of business application compatibility issue. Maybe there was something else that was going on. For example, the one at the very top of the list, enable automatic updates. That's actually not for Windows updates. That's actually for Microsoft Office updates. So I hadn't on this system pushed any of the Office security recommendations, because Microsoft has a whole separate site where we can push Office 365 policies down to do things like block macros, block malicious content. A lot of attacks, believe it or not, Cristal, come in through macros that are embedded into Excel documents now, where you say, yes, I want to run this macro, and it could be some VB script that runs behind the scenes on your system, and then the bad guy might get you with that, okay? And so what I wanted to point out was that even although this reads 20, maybe we get this down to a number, let's say 10, after we've tweaked these, and that might be good enough. But does that mean that we never come back to this again?
No.
Or do we always keep reviewing this?
Like we said, I mean, it's an ever-evolving beast that you need to stay on top of.
Yeah, and like some of these things, like setting minimum password length and enforced password history and things like that. Now we look at alternatives inside of here. One of the things that's not listed is, hey, maybe you should consider using some type of passwordless authentication. Maybe you should use some like Windows Hello for Business. Maybe you should take and use some type of multi-factor authentication. That's not listed in here. It just says passwords, right? So maybe we've gone to a passwordless solution. All right. And so you can see one of the big ones in here, though.
The important thing is to go through them all.
Well, and
right, and figure out which ones you need to change and which ones you don't.
Yep.
And make sure that you have your reasoning behind it. And that reasoning might change down the road. And when it does, then you need to come back and reconfigure.
Well, and
or reevaluate.
And there's two big ones in here that should be evaluated, right? So, for example, the local administrator password lapse solution actually doesn't work on a modern desktop. There is no solution that is out there that you can use from a group policy perspective for a modern desktop that's non-Active Directory domain joined. And so if you're running a modern desktop that's AAD only joined, this will always flag as on. You just, like I said, have to be able to justify that in your audit report as to why. And things like disabling local storage of passwords and credentials, well, we don't want to have things like pass the hash attacks where we can use tools like Mimikatz and things like that to go scrape credentials, harvest and move laterally through the environment and bounce around through different pieces of the infrastructure, okay? So, like I said, this is evolving, and this is something where we have to look at, it's not a configuration with a security baseline where it's going to fix every single problem that you have, but it's a starting point. And this starting point is better than a next finish install of Windows. For example, tweaking the UAC settings and stuff like that on your infrastructure. Having a better posture for your standard users versus elevated users. Just better general security practices. And I guess the next question is that, with these security baselines, can you do more with them than just Windows 10? And as you can see, we can actually do some Defender settings inside of here. We can do Microsoft Edge security baselines. And actually, since the release of this video, there's a new setting inside of Intune and the Endpoint Manager console called the Settings Catalog. And we can actually do some significant tweaks to Edge now, right from the Settings Catalog, instead of having to do custom OMA URIs for every single setting that we want to have to look at.
And I think that's an important point as well, is like already there's different updates and more to this product because it is so pivotal in your environment. Microsoft's putting a lot of development into it and a lot of money into it and a lot of backing and knowledge, and it is something that it's so very important that it will continue even from when you guys see this to the time you get to actually go out and work with it and everything. It will have changed already. It's that important.
Yeah, and the other thing I have to say with the security baselines is, the question always comes up, are security baselines good out of box? Well, yeah, of course they're good, but are they perfect? No, nothing's perfect.
And are you done once you put it in with the baselines?
Absolutely not. They always need tuning, and you need to test inside of your environment. One of the things that we find is that certain templates and certain baselines are too restrictive for certain environments. Not everybody needs a Department of Defense standard Windows 10 image build for the SMB shop that's got 10 to 20 users. right? That might be too tight. If I can't just access a file server because the security restrictions are too tight, there's got to be a balancing act between security and
Well, and
usability as well.
there's app restrictions as well, right? Certain
Yep.
apps need to have access to stuff that we would normally lock down, and you just have to make sure that if you are leaving that vulnerability, you're finding another way to block it, right?
Absolutely. And with the principle of least privilege and reducing administrative rights on the desktop and the modern desktop, one of the things to remember is that, you know, most malware is going to come in the form of some type of an executable that's going to be driven off of your system. And so maybe looking at something like App Locker, configuring good App Locker policies. Our good friend Sammy Lihau takes and he has a full-time business configuring App Locker for customers all over the world. Jeremy Moskowitz, his products, they configure App Locker and App Locker-like policies across all versions of Windows. And so that's also additional pieces that you can layer on. The security baselines are exactly that. They are a baseline. They are not the finished product, okay? They're going to help us get to the end, towards the end of the journey, but it's not all the way there.
Like a lot of Microsoft products, right? They're going to take you 80% of the way, and then it's up to you to get that other 20%.
Yeah. Often we get asked the question, Cristal, is that are security baselines NIST or CIS compliant? And if you're not familiar with what NIST and CIS are, they're standards that are out there that are driven for different types of computing and modern computing environments. And so, for example, if you want to pass a particular audit or something like that, you may have to take and showcase the fact that you do have the NIST and CIS compliant benchmarks in place. I'm a big fan of the CIS benchmarks because they've got a fantastic scanning tool that can kind of prove the work that we're doing. Very easy to set up, very easy to use. And I think the big thing is here is that when we take a look at these benchmarks that are available for us, is the benchmark that we're getting from Microsoft going to be fully compliant with those?
No, but it will take you part of the way there, and then it's up to you to get yourself the rest of the way there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Microsoft actually provides these security baseline templates for general Windows computing environments and what we'll call non-modern desktops, where we're just in a hybrid or we're just in a full Active Directory, via the Security and Compliance Toolkit. And interestingly enough, it is actually the same team at Microsoft that builds the Security Compliance Toolkit for group policy, as well as the Intune security baseline. So it's the same team that works on them. So when they're working through and deriving the best practices and standards that Microsoft is recommending, because what we can consider is that this security baseline is a Microsoft recommendation. Okay, and then you'd have to layer on and add on some of these other pieces for CIS and NIST if you want to become fully compliant. Will they get you closer to where you have to be?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And remember that these settings are better than doing nothing. And like anything in this world, test, 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 okay? So you're going to want to take and work through your security teams. Hopefully you're in the process, if you haven't got it already, forming red and blue teams, active testers and active defenders on your networks.
Wait. You don't just throw it out there and hope for the best?
Oh, no, you just throw this directly into production and you wait for all the tickets to come in. That's how you figure out what's wrong.
That's how you figure out what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. What's tests? My production is test. Some of you are laughing.
I don't always test, but when I do, it's in production.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great way to hear from your users as well. So
that's right. If you're lonely,
that's right.
You absolutely throw this out in production right away.
If you're finding you're not getting enough help desk tickets, please deploy full lockdown benchmark baseline policies and you'll get a lot of tickets coming in. From very happy...
Unless you blocked them all.
From very happy end users. Unless you block them from sending email, then they won't be able to send emails. So that could solve your problem as well.
And you get more time off.
All right, so just a quick rundown of some of the setting groups that are available for us inside of the security baselines, Cristal. Couple of these in particular are a little on the light side, and I'm actually thinking I might jump over to just a quick demo here. Should we see a quick demo?
Yes, I prefer demo.
Okay.
I love slides, but I like demo better.
So there's about, I think there's about 30 odd setting groups that are inside of here. And one of the things that I want to point out is that there are some better places to configure these settings outside of the baseline so that we have a little better flexibility and control over them. For example, one that really sticks out to me is drive encryption.
So can you configure these in the baseline?
You can configure portions of them inside of the baseline.
But should you?
Yeah, and so for me, if I've got a portion of it in the baseline and I've got a full-fledged policy down below and different portions of the UI that give me a better management experience, I'm probably going to want to take the full
So just leave it as
experience.
unconfigured for now, and then we go into it after and
That's right.
change it.
That's right. And in that slide we showed earlier about the Defender Security Center with the policy changes, it doesn't really matter how the policies come down to the system. It could be from a baseline, it could be from individual policies. It doesn't really matter how they get there as long as they get there.
And from experience, there's a few that we prefer to configure after the fact, right?
Yeah, for sure. Let's see if we can go ahead and get into this. I might have to take this out of big presentation mode here, Cristal. And then I'm going to have to go log back in here.
Can you type, or can you talk and type your password at the same time?
Believe it or not, it's a new trick that I have here. So we'll go back into my nice little lab environment that we've got here. We'll come down to endpoint security. Under endpoint security, we'll come under security baselines. And this is where you're going to find your baselines. Now, interestingly enough, you don't have to do anything. Microsoft actually preloads these baselines inside of your portal for you.
Thank you, Microsoft.
And so when I click on Windows 10, for example, I can see that I've got the December 2020 version. And I find that these come out, I don't know the exact timing for them, but I think it's every 4 months or 6 months or so. I think the last one came out around August before this. So it's probably that's like a 6-month cycle that they would come down. I would have to double check to be 100% sure. So when I click on the security baseline, you can see that I'm definitely working on things in here. We've got some errors because, of course, this is my lab portal here. And
it's not as pretty if it's all fixed.
That's right. Who has a completely working environment? And then we can come down and see all of the different setting areas inside of here. So for example, let's check out that BitLocker setting. So that BitLocker setting that we have, you'll see that there's actually not very much in here. It's just, okay, I want to configure BitLocker's removable drive policy. So if we went ahead, I'd have to actually edit the configuration to get in here. Go down to BitLocker. And I could go ahead and configure that, and I can say, yes, I want to block write access to removable drives that don't have BitLocker. Well, that means that any of your external USB hard drives might all of a sudden become inaccessible in your environment, so that may not give you the desired results. You may want to test. Now, what I want to show you is that that's it for BitLocker policies inside of here. So I might want to just leave that as not configured inside of this example, come back to endpoint security, come back to disk encryption, and I may want to take and create myself a new policy in here. So if I create myself a new policy, create a new BitLocker policy, I'm just going to show you the settings inside of here. Type anything in. We're not going to save it. Yeah, that's the naming standard that we have. Look at all the other default settings that we have inside of here. So do you see how there's removable drive settings? Look at all the rest of the settings that we have. Remember, there was only this setting here. Now we've got additional settings that are available for us. And I can choose encryption methods, and I can choose a lot more options other than what are the stock defaults that come in the security baseline. So
this is where we were talking about why it sometimes, even though it may feel like you should configure these things, sometimes it's better to leave it as not configured and then come back in and configure it a little more in depth afterwards.
Absolutely.
The baseline is better than nothing. Absolutely. But certain things you may want to leave undone, for lack of a better term, so that you can fix it. Or
Defender security settings are a good one as well, because there's a lot of settings in there that Microsoft is recommending. I just like to look at it to see what Microsoft is recommending, but then I'll go create my own Defender security policy that's mine, that I can manage a little bit better from within the UI. Okay, and so that was just my point, is that that baseline, you might want to not configure all of the settings out of there. If there are other blades that you can configure with more usability options, you may want to use those instead of just using the stock baseline. I'd like to see the settings, but I may not use all of those settings out of the baseline. So I kind of look at the baseline, I take the baseline, and then I create a light version of the baseline, and that's what I'm going to take and I'm going to use kind of moving forward. Okay, so let's go back in here.
think you can go through.
And so these are all of the different setting areas. So those are all in there. So we can do like Defender settings, local security policies, and even the local security policy settings. There's new options that came out since these baselines came out, and this may change with the next version of the baseline. But like, for example, local security options inside of there are very limited in the baseline. And the local security policies that were available for us when this came out, you have to configure custom OMA URIs, which are just individual settings from the configuration settings providers. And now we can use the settings catalog, which is a way easier way to take in to configure a lot of these settings. Okay. All right. So now we're ready to use this security baseline. So what are some of the key things to note, Cristal, before we take and we move into production?
Always deploy directly into production.
Yes, yes. You
If
get
you're
lots
lonely.
of tickets. Lots of tickets.
If you're not lonely and you don't want a lot of extra communication, test first.
Yes, so we'll create a test group, right? So like anything, we'll have a test group. I like to think of the same way that we have Windows updates and we have different rings for Windows updates, ring A, B, C, D kind of updates for who's going to get them and how we're going to test and roll through. Think of exactly the same thing. Have different ring levels that you're going to have with your security baselines, match kind of your existing policies that you have in place today, because your advanced testers that you have are probably going to be very willing to test these new security settings that you have as well. So that
I'm very
kind of
willing to
builds-
give feedback.
give a good test bed, right? And how about this one? Intune policies tattoo on the system.
Okay, what do you mean by tattoo on the system?
Okay, so with group policies,
We all love a good tattoo.
yeah, well, I do, and I have some tattoos. And so with tattooing settings on your system, what it means is that I'll apply a policy, and what it's going to do is it's going to lock in, kind of hard code that setting. So if I just say, oh wow, that security baseline really messed up my system, so I'm just going to turn off the security baseline and my system's going to be completely back to normal. Not necessarily true. So you may have to actually create an undo policy to reverse what it is that you did in the first place. And that's why testing is so important. And certain group policies would do this in a similar fashion, where you could make the setting, and just because you fell out of a scope of management with group policy doesn't necessarily mean that that policy setting is going to be removed from your system. So many of these settings will get tattooed onto your system. And I've even found that on some systems that fall out of even licensing compliance, for example, Cristal, the user is no longer licensed for Intune anymore. Those settings are still locked in on their system. Okay, so they're not just going to get removed. We could actually probably disjoin right from and go over to another tenant if we had to, and these settings would still be on their system. So a lot of testing is required.
So what goes on must come off, basically.
Yeah, or what goes on means an autopilot reimage. All right, so a couple notes from the field that I have just from recent deployments that we've done is don't deploy BitLocker settings from a baseline. We talked a little bit about that. Configure only the generic Windows Defender security settings inside of that baseline, because you may want to get specific for different business units or groups. For example, antivirus exclusion rules, firewall rules for different departments, things like that. They probably want to be customized. Now, you can only do a limited subset of that in the baseline anyways, but I do recommend that you use kind of the security blade that's available under Manage to do antivirus, encryption, firewall, EDR, attack surface reduction, and more inside of there. Use those blades. They're there for a reason. You get more configuration options inside of there. All right, this was just a view of the BitLocker policies. We kind of showed that a little bit in the demo. And some final thoughts that we have here, Cristal.
Main one for me is the simple, this is not a set it and forget it type of thing. It is literally something you have to come back to again and again and again. Not just because your business needs will change, but what's available to you will change, as well as the threats that are out there will change. It's an ever-evolving process, so you need to have at least someone staying on top of it consistently.
Yeah, and a couple of the ones that are in there for me are endpoint security, including the baselines and looking after this, including advanced threat protection and EDR, are full-time jobs. This is a cybersecurity engineer position. If you're not actively looking to fill that in your organization, we highly recommend looking at adding that into your org chart, because this is something that needs to be taken very seriously. You do not want to be like your customers that are down the street that got hit with ransomware and they got shut down. You don't want to be that organization that has to go inform all of your customers and employees that you're now, basically, for lack of better terms, out of business until you get this fixed. Fix it before it becomes a big problem.
And I want to address the whole, like, antivirus is not enough. There are a lot of corporations out there that when we get in, that's exactly, well, we have antivirus installed. We should be fine. We're protected. We have, it's not enough. Not in today's day and age. It is one measure. It's not going to keep you as safe as maybe it once would have.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the other things to remember is that consider Policy Pack from our dear friend
Jeremy Moskowitz.
Absolutely.
Fellow MVP.
He is the godfather of group policy. He is the godfather of configuration settings inside of mobile device and modern device management. Make sure that you take a look at those products and platforms. He's got customers all over the world, been doing this forever. There really is nobody that has a deeper skill set than Jeremy out in the field today. Great resource, and thank you once again, Jeremy, for doing our keynote. You want to implement the principle of zero trust today. This is where we have, and simply put, we have domain administrators should only log into domain controllers. Server admins should only log into servers. Workstation admins should only log into workstations. We shouldn't have workstation admins logging into servers. We shouldn't have server admins logging into workstations.
And that piggybacks onto the whole training your team. Right?
Yes.
Like, you need to train your team. That I know everybody wants access to everything, and everybody wants to be able to not have to go through all these steps to access something that they need once a year. But guess what? That is a necessary thing now, and you're going to have to train your staff to understand the risk, understand the reasoning behind why you're not going to give them access to everything, and explain why it's so important, right? A lot of people just don't understand. Well, why would they want to get into my picture folder? Who cares about what I have on my machine? I'll tell you who cares. The guys out there that want what's on your entire network. That's who cares.
And the last piece that I want to bring up is that in this modern pandemic era that we're living in, COVID-19, your remote workforce are easy targets for threat actors that are out there today. And so make sure that you lock them down and do what you have to. Everyone, be safe. Thank you for attending MVP Days. We really appreciate all of your support. Remember, if you like the sessions and you like the channel, you smash that like button and you take and you subscribe. We're trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers here. We really appreciate all the support that you've given us over the years. And Cristal, any final thoughts here?
No, just thank you. Stay safe and keep it locked down.
Daddy.